Welcome to Creepy Corner Stories, where the chill in the air isn't just the winter wind, it's the unsettling tales of horror that will freeze you to the bone. Tonight, we're bundling up and venturing into the icy unknown as we explore winter trip horror stories. So, grab a blanket, turn the lights down low, and prepare yourself for stories that will send shivers down your spine. Whether it's the howl of the wind or something else outside your window, these winter horrors will leave you questioning what really lies beneath the snow. Let's begin. Story: The Cabin in the Blizzard. It was a cold December evening when a group of 4 friends decided to take a trip to a remote mountain cabin. The idea was to escape the chaos of the city and enjoy a peaceful weekend surrounded by snow and nature. Mia, her boyfriend Ethan, and their friends Sarah and Lucas packed up their SUV with warm clothes, food, and firewood, ready for a relaxing getaway. The journey started uneventfully. The cabin, located deep in the woods of Maine, was said to be beautiful and serene, perfect for a winter retreat. However, as they drove higher into the mountains, the weather took a sudden turn. The gentle snowfall transformed into a raging blizzard. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the winding roads became slick with ice. They debated turning back, but Lucas, the adventurous one, insisted they were close. By the time they reached the cabin, the storm had reached its peak. Snow piled up quickly, and the icy wind howled through the trees. The cabin itself was quaint but old, with creaking wooden beams and a fireplace that seemed like it hadn't been used in years. It was isolated, with no other buildings in sight. The first night passed uneventfully, though the howling wind kept Mia awake. She thought she heard faint whispers outside, but she brushed it off as her imagination playing tricks on her. The next morning, they found strange footprints in the snow surrounding the cabin. They were too large to be from any of them and seemed to circle the house. Lucas joked that it was probably a bear, but Mia and Sarah felt uneasy. The storm showed no signs of letting up. With no cell service and the nearest town miles away, they decided to stay put and wait it out. As night fell, the unease grew. Shadows seemed to move outside the frost-covered windows, and the friends swore they heard footsteps crunching through the snow. Ethan decided to check the perimeter with Lucas while the girls stayed inside. While outside, Ethan and Lucas found the same massive footprints from earlier, now leading into the woods. But what chilled them to the bone was the fact that a new set of tracks appeared to lead back to the cabin. They hurried inside, locking the doors and windows, but the sense of safety was short-lived. At around midnight, Sarah screamed. She had seen someone, or something, standing at the edge of the forest. It was tall, with unnaturally long limbs, and its glowing eyes were fixed on the cabin. Lucas grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the figure, but it vanished instantly, leaving only a cloud of snow in its wake. Terrified, the group huddled in the living room, keeping the fire blazing and a knife close by. Throughout the night, they heard tapping on the windows and the faint sound of laughter carried by the wind. When dawn finally broke, they found scratches on the cabin door and deep gouges in the wood, as if something had tried to claw its way inside. Desperate to leave, they dug out their SUV from the snow and prepared to make the dangerous drive back down the mountain. As they loaded their belongings, Mia noticed something horrifying. Written in the frost on the rear windshield were the words, "Don't come back." The drive back was tense, but they made it safely to the main road. When they reached the nearest town, they shared their story with the locals. An elderly man, who had lived in the area his whole life, listened intently before telling them about the legend of the Winter Stalker. According to him, the creature preyed on those who ventured too far into the woods during a storm, drawn to their fear and isolation. Mia and her friends vowed never to return to the mountains. To this day, they still don't know if what they experienced was real or a terrifying hallucination brought on by the storm. But one thing is certain, none of them will ever forget the winter trip that turned into a nightmare. Story: The Frozen Lake. A group of 6 college friends, Anna, Mark, Sophia, Chris, Ellie, and Jake, planned a weekend getaway to a frozen lake deep in the northern Minnesota woods. The lake was famous for its thick ice, where people could skate, fish, or just enjoy the serene, snowy landscape. It was secluded, peaceful, and far from civilization, exactly what they were looking for. They arrived late on a Friday night, greeted by a heavy silence and an endless expanse of snow and ice. The cabin they rented sat on the edge of the lake, its old wooden beams groaning under the weight of the accumulating snow. Inside, it was cozy but eerily quiet, with only a small gas heater and an old radio for entertainment. That first night, as they sat around the fireplace sharing stories, Sophia brought up a chilling local legend she had read online. "They call it the Ice Phantom," she began. "The story goes that in the 1800s, a man fell through the ice while trying to cross the lake during a storm. He froze to death in the water, and they say his spirit still wanders, searching for others to join him beneath the ice." The group laughed nervously, but Jake, the skeptic, scoffed. "These stories are just made up to scare tourists," he said. "There's no such thing as ghosts." They soon brushed off the tale and went to bed, but Anna couldn't sleep. Lying awake, she thought she heard faint cracking noises, like the sound of ice shifting under weight. Peering out the frosty window, she thought she saw something moving on the frozen lake, a dark figure slowly gliding across the ice. But when she blinked, it was gone. The next morning, the group ventured onto the lake to skate and explore. The ice was thick and clear, with jagged white cracks visible beneath the surface. Chris, always adventurous, wandered farther out than the others, despite their warnings. "Relax," he called out. "This ice is solid." Suddenly, a deep, low rumble echoed across the lake. Chris froze. Beneath his feet, the ice began to spiderweb with cracks. "Get back here now!" Mark yelled, but Chris was already running toward them. Just as he reached safety, a loud crack split the air. A large section of the ice collapsed behind him, leaving a dark, gaping hole in the lake. Shaken but relieved, the group decided to stick closer to shore for the rest of the day. But as the sun set and the temperature dropped, strange things began to happen. Ellie noticed what looked like footprints leading from the broken ice to the shore, even though no one had been out there. Sophia heard whispers carried on the wind, though no one else seemed to hear them. And as night fell, the old radio in the cabin started picking up static, interrupted by faint, unintelligible voices. That night, the group huddled together in the cabin, uneasy but trying to rationalize everything. Around midnight, they heard a loud, deliberate knock on the front door. Mark, trying to be brave, opened it, but no one was there. Just a fresh set of wet footprints leading away toward the lake. Panic set in. They locked the doors and windows, but the knocking continued sporadically throughout the night, sometimes on the windows, sometimes on the walls. When the knocking finally stopped, they thought it was over. But then they heard it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound coming from under the floorboards. Terrified, they realized the cabin was built partially on stilts over the edge of the lake. Jake grabbed a flashlight and opened the trapdoor leading to the crawl space. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing wet streaks leading up from the ice below. And in the far corner, he saw something crouched. Pale, skeletal, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly blue. It turned toward him and let out an otherworldly wail. Jake scrambled back, slamming the trapdoor shut. The friends didn't wait to see what would happen next. Grabbing only their essentials, they piled into their car and sped off into the night, leaving the cabin and the lake behind. When they reached the nearest town, they told a local ranger what had happened. He listened with a grim expression before saying, "You're not the first to leave that cabin in a hurry. That lake's claimed more lives than I care to count. People say they see something out there, and once you do, it doesn't let you leave so easily." To this day, none of them can fully explain what they saw or experienced. But Anna swears that sometimes in her dreams, she still hears the sound of ice cracking and the faint knock of something trying to get in. Story: The Snowstorm Strangers. In January 2016, newlyweds Lily and Matt decided to take a road trip to celebrate their first anniversary. They planned to drive from Denver to a small, picturesque inn nestled deep in the Rocky Mountains. The forecast predicted light snow, but nothing they couldn't handle. Eager for a romantic escape, they packed up their SUV and set out early in the morning. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the weather grew worse. The gentle flurries turned into a fierce snowstorm with howling winds and whiteout conditions. By mid-afternoon, their GPS had lost signal and the winding mountain roads became increasingly treacherous. Matt suggested turning back, but Lily was convinced they were close to the inn. When the road became completely obscured by snow, their SUV skidded into a snowdrift and stalled. They tried restarting it, but the engine refused to turn over. Their phones had no service, and it was too dangerous to walk in the storm. With no other choice, they decided to wait it out in the car. Hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. The temperature inside the car dropped rapidly. To conserve fuel and battery, they turned the engine and heater off and wrapped themselves in blankets. Just as Lily began to doze off, there was a loud thud on the roof of the car. Matt grabbed a flashlight and stepped out to investigate, shining the beam onto the car's roof. Snow blanketed the top, but there was no sign of what had caused the sound. As he circled the car, he noticed something peculiar: footprints. They were human, barefoot and fresh, leading from the forest to the vehicle and then disappearing into the trees. Matt hurried back inside, locking the doors. "Someone's out there," he whispered. Lily's eyes widened, but she tried to stay calm. "Maybe they're lost too," she suggested. But deep down, they both knew something felt off. Who would be walking barefoot in a snowstorm? Minutes later, another sound broke through the howling wind, a faint knock on the passenger window. Lily screamed, but when they looked, there was nothing there. The knocking moved, first to the back window, then the driver's side, as though someone was circling the car. But every time they shone the flashlight, the space was empty, save for swirling snow. Panicking, Matt tried the engine again, and miraculously, it sputtered to life. He threw the car into gear and began driving slowly down the road, hoping to find help. But as they rounded a bend, the headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was a man, dressed in ragged clothes, his skin bluish and frostbitten. He didn't move or react to the blaring horn as they skidded to a stop mere feet away. Before they could decide what to do, the man smiled. His lips were cracked, and his teeth were unnaturally sharp. He raised one hand and pointed toward the forest, his eyes locking with Matt's. Then he simply turned and walked into the trees, disappearing into the blizzard. Terrified, they sped away, the car skidding dangerously on the icy road. Lily looked back and gasped. In the red glow of the taillights, she could see dozens of figures emerging from the trees, silent, barefoot, and frostbitten, watching them as they fled. They eventually found an old ranger station several miles down the road, where they stayed until the storm passed. When they told the ranger what had happened, he grew pale. "You were lucky," he said. "People have been disappearing in that area for years. The locals have a name for them, the snowbound. They say it's the spirits of those who froze to death in the mountains. They're trapped in the storm, and they don't want to be alone." Lily and Matt cut their trip short and returned to Denver, vowing never to return to the mountains in winter. But even now, Lily swears that on quiet, snowy nights, she can still hear faint knocks on the windows of their home. Story: The Abandoned Ski Lodge. It was supposed to be the perfect winter getaway for a group of 5 friends: Rachel, Tyler, Megan, Ben, and Claire. They had planned a ski trip at a resort in Vermont, but a last-minute cancellation left them scrambling for accommodations. That's when Rachel found the listing for an old ski lodge deep in the mountains. The photos were charming, and the price was unbelievably cheap. "It's probably just off the beaten path," Megan said, "a hidden gem." They booked it without hesitation, unaware of the nightmare waiting for them. The drive to the lodge was picturesque at first, snow-covered trees and mountains stretching as far as the eye could see. But as they ventured further, the road became narrower, the snow thicker, and the GPS unreliable. By the time they reached the lodge, night had fallen, and the place was shrouded in eerie silence. The lodge was massive, far larger than they had expected. Its weathered wood siding and broken shutters hinted at years of neglect. Still, they chalked it up to age. Inside, the air was cold, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. The furniture was old-fashioned, the wallpaper peeling in places, but there was enough charm to convince them to stay. A faded sign over the fireplace read, "Welcome to Frosthaven Lodge." The first night was uneventful, though the wind outside howled so loudly it sounded like screams. Megan joked that it added to the rustic charm, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. The next morning, they decided to explore the property. Behind the lodge was an overgrown ski slope abandoned for decades. At the top of the slope, they found a collapsed chairlift, its rusted cables dangling like skeletal remains. Tyler spotted an old ski helmet half buried in the snow, its visor cracked. "This place must have been something back in the day," he said, though his voice carried a note of unease. As they headed back to the lodge, Rachel noticed something strange. Their footprints were the only ones leading up to the slope, but there were fresh tracks heading back to the lodge alongside theirs. "Did someone follow us?" she asked, but the others dismissed it, saying it was probably wildlife. That night, the unease grew. Rachel woke to the sound of faint laughter echoing through the lodge. She nudged Tyler awake, but the noise stopped as soon as he listened. "You're just imagining things," he said, turning over. But Rachel wasn't the only one hearing things. Ben, sleeping in the room across the hall, woke up to the sound of shuffling outside his door. Thinking it was one of the others, he got up to check, but the hallway was empty. The only thing he found was a single, wet footprint on the wooden floor, leading down the stairs. By the third night, everyone was on edge. The whispers and laughter had grown louder, and strange things began to happen. Lights flickered, doors slammed, and the temperature inside the lodge plummeted. Claire swore she saw someone standing at the edge of the forest, just beyond the glow of their flashlights, but when they investigated, there was no one there. Desperate for answers, they searched the lodge for any clues about its history. In the dusty attic, they found a trunk filled with old photographs and newspapers. One article, dated 1978, detailed a tragic avalanche that had struck the ski slope during peak season, killing dozens of skiers and staff. Frosthaven Lodge had been shut down shortly after. As they read, a loud bang echoed through the house. The group rushed downstairs to find the front door wide open, snow blowing inside. Tyler slammed it shut, but not before seeing something in the distance. A group of shadowy figures, motionless, standing in the snow. They seemed to be watching the lodge. Panicking, they decided to leave immediately. But when they got to the driveway, their car wouldn't start. The engine groaned but refused to turn over, and the snow was falling so heavily now that the road back was impassable. They were trapped. That night, the lodge came alive. Shadows darted along the walls, laughter and screams echoed through the halls, and icy cold spots appeared in random rooms. The group huddled in the living room, keeping the fire burning as their only light. Suddenly, the front door burst open with a forceful gust of wind. Standing in the doorway was a figure, pale, frostbitten, and wearing a ski jacket from the 1970s. It stepped inside, its hollow eyes scanning the room. Behind it, more figures appeared, their frozen forms filling the doorway. One by one, they entered the lodge, their frostbitten faces twisted in silent screams. The friends backed into a corner as the figures surrounded them. And then, as suddenly as it started, everything went quiet. The figures vanished, the front door slammed shut, and the lodge fell silent once more. When morning came, the storm had passed, and their car miraculously started. They didn't waste time asking questions, driving away as fast as the icy roads allowed. They reported the lodge to the authorities, but when investigators arrived, they found the place empty. No signs of recent activity, no footprints, nothing. Months later, Rachel came across an online forum about haunted locations. One post mentioned Frosthaven Lodge, warning travelers to stay away. The last line sent chills down her spine. They only let you leave if they want you to, and they never let you forget. Thank you for watching and venturing into the icy unknown with me. These winter horrors remind us that even the most serene settings can hold terrifying secrets. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more chilling tales that will keep you up at night. And as always, stay safe out there. Whether it's a snowstorm, a frozen lake, or an abandoned lodge, remember, some doors are better left unopened, and some trips are better left unplanned. Until next time, stay warm and keep an eye on the shadows.